My name is Clive Posselt with the Realization Group, and as I said, very warm welcome to our discussion this afternoon around enabling trading success in the cloud. Hosted by IPC and Vela, and very kindly supported by our friends at Celent and Nasdaq. Before we get started, I'd like to just touch on a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to aim to keep the conversation to around 35 to 40 minutes, which should leave plenty of time for Q&A. If you could please send in your questions using the Q&A functionality on the platform, it'll really help me look at the questions, make sure they're directed to the right people, and help the flow of the conversation. So, enabling trading success in the cloud. There's been a lot of focus on trading firms and exchanges moving technology platforms to the cloud, the means of streamlining infrastructure, reducing costs, and refreshing their architecture. However, one of the key benefits is also the ability to test and validate new business ideas, strategies, and markets, and know where to concentrate your investment income. So before we get fully into the conversation, what I'd love to do is ask our team this afternoon to introduce themselves so you understand who they are and their backgrounds. So first of all, can I come to you, Monica? If you could just give us a quick 20 seconds intro to you and what you do.
Sure. Hello. Welcome everyone to the webinar, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. My name is Monica Somerville. I head capital markets research for Celent. We are a division of Oliver Wyman, and we focus on offering research and advisory services, looking at technology across all the financial services for the global financial institutional market. I'm an engineer by training, but have always worked in capital markets technology, mainly in front office, but have experience on buy side, sell side, and consulting. So pretty good view across.
Yeah, that's a pretty good resume. Thank you very much, Monica. Mike, can I ask you to go next, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Clive. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Good evening. I'm Mike Smith. I'm from IPC. IPC is a global fintech leader providing secure and compliant solutions powering the financial markets. And what I'm mainly responsible for is working with our global exchange partners, market data vendors, ATSs, MTFs, you name it. Really focusing with our partners like Garrett from Nasdaq, as well as Ali from Vela, making sure we're providing the right products and services for our marketplace.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. Can I go to you next, please, Ollie?
Sure. Ollie Cadman, Chief Product Officer at Vela. So here at Vela, we're a market data and execution technology provider, primarily focused on the front office, providing feeds, platforms, and software to exchanges, sell-side, buy-side firms across the globe.
Thank you very much indeed. And last but not least, Garrett, could we ask you to just quickly introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Garrett Stavrovich. Thanks for having me here today. I'm in the Investment Intelligence division at Nasdaq, and I head up a couple of our data products, including our cloud offering.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Really this afternoon, we're going to look at how private and public cloud environments can help financial institutions fail fast to quickly iterate and innovate. Some of the headings we're going to look at is enabling rapid success to new markets, the role of ecosystems and marketplaces, which I think is key to the evolution of the industry, the ability to explore emerging technologies and experiment with new ideas, and also the use of hybrid models, which I think is increasingly interesting to everyone. Before we get into the depths of the discussion, Monica, I know you've done some industry outreach and have some thoughts you'd like to share with us as a sort of introduction to our conversation this afternoon, and got a couple of slides you'd like to speak to. So if I could quickly share those, and if you could give us that little bit of an intro, then we can move into discussion in more depth.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So if you bring up the first slide.
Will do. And if I do that, and
okay.
Yeah,
there we go.
There you go.
Perfect. So I've personally been following cloud adoption in capital markets quite closely since about 2016. And I just think it's useful to remind ourselves how far we've come. If you can cast your mind that far back, and I know January seems a long time ago, but if we think back to 2016, You probably will recall that most banks were saying it was unlikely that they would ever use public cloud. In truth, there was quite a lot of work going on behind the scenes in exploring and using cloud technology, but there was just this feeling that it was almost a reputational risk to admit to this. So by 2017, that had started to change significantly. There were high-profile announcements around cloud, and really by the end of that year, it became more of a reputational risk to say you didn't have a cloud strategy. And now, especially with what we've had to deal with this year, it's safe to say that many cases, capital markets firms are taking an entirely cloud-first approach at this point. So this diagram that you can see here maps out Celent's view of the operational and strategic impacts of cloud adoption in financial services. The trends around technology innovation and competition from new entrants, that means that incumbents really need to think strategically about cloud, especially how cloud impacts the way in which they source and deploy technology. So the new normal, we're hearing a lot about the new normal, but it's distributed. We know it's distributed, and ecosystems are forming around newer and more flexible platforms. There are different approaches to consider here. For example, public cloud, multi-cloud, or hybrid. Clive, you've already, something we're going to be talking about today. On an operational level, line of business heads, they need to rethink how they plan, budget, deploy, and maintain software. And keep in mind that cloud is an enabler for new technologies such as AI. We see cloud having big impacts on cost optimization and data management as well. So if you just flip to the next slide.
You see that next slide now?
That's it, yeah. I just wanted to share some data we collected in around July of this year. We surveyed executives across financial services. This was a few months into the pandemic response. And by this point, most people have been working from home at some time. As you can see, both in terms of the long-term impact and the greatest challenges that people reported, cloud has a really big role to play going forward. There's still some questions to resolve. There's the need for more flexible infrastructure, greater use of automation, better data access, and extension of technology to remote sites can all be helped with the right cloud strategy. However, on the challenges side of the picture, latency of systems and data access were flagged. And while cloud can address these, the design of these solutions and ensuring that you work with the right partners will really have a big impact here. So hopefully that was interesting, and we can move on to the meat of the discussion.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Monica. One of the headings I just raised a little bit earlier was enabling rapid access to new markets, data sources and services to validate business cases. Monica, if I can just stay with you for the time being, what are some of the ways that cloud supports the above and what we've just discussed there? And is the data applications capital markets firms need actually available through the cloud at the moment?
Yeah, so cloud is like a tap. It can be turned off and on really quickly. It allows technical staff to be freed up from having to manage or even configure the infrastructure and communication lines, and that can take weeks or months even. And that all means they can focus on improving time to market and understanding the business case in more detail. And regarding whether the data needed is available via the cloud, I'm just going to say the short answer is yes, absolutely. Both the market data vendors and exchanges have already made, some exchanges in any case have already made premium data sets available in the cloud, including real-time streaming data. When it comes to storing and retrieving data from the cloud service providers support multiple options for this. They can support time series databases. They can support streaming data. They've got support for IP multicast and PubSub for event-driven systems. So, there's not much out there that you can say, you couldn't do from a data perspective. And, you might have seen the recent announcement, I think it was last month from Aquis Exchange, SGX and AWS. They did a POC where they actually showed you could run a cloud native exchange. So that's possible as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much for that. If I could come to you, Ollie, next. How much faster do you think a firm can manage this validation process via the cloud? And have you seen clients gaining much traction with the concept?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So we've definitely seen some traction in that space. We put Superfeed, our market data feed, live in AWS, middle of this year. And we continue to see interest from clients that are looking to either accessing, some level of migrating their infrastructure, etc. And I think that's been talked about a lot in terms of other panels and events, but also just looking to try new markets and looking to launch new services. And whilst I think we're at a position now where the actual time to still validate that business idea, validate that strategy is probably the same. I do think over time, to Monica's point, as you continue to have new tools available, it speeds up that process. What it really is that time to market piece. So, if someone wanted to try a new market on, our DMA platform or our market data feed in a physical environment, you've got the lead time of at least having to, put in a cross connect or maybe putting in a lease line, etc. And then on top of that, obviously, potentially put servers in, etc. And you can just do all of that, in hours, maybe days, rather than having, rather than weeks to months, and actually get to the meat of the goal, which is really to, test your new model, test a new strategy, try a new vendor, much more quickly than you could before. There are still barriers. Well, maybe barriers isn't the right word. There are still areas challenges that I think, don't necessarily move at the same pace, and I think will over time exchange approvals, etc. But on our DMA platform, being able to spin up a new market, is where we deliver it all as a service. Suddenly becomes a lot quicker than it would be in the old world.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Ollie. I think this leads on very nicely to speak to you, Mike. Can you give us an overview of how your clients access these new markets and data services, given your very central part of the infrastructure for all this?
Yeah, following on Ollie's lead there, looking at the cloud strategies, you'll need that connectivity and that access to the source of the data, brokers or execution venues, what have you. And having that ability with Connexus Cloud and Ollie's Superfeed, we have over 7,000 capital market locations on our network in 750 financial cities, in close to over 60 countries. So, with that dense footprint and also having global exchange partners like Eric and Nasdaq, we have over 80 exchange venues as well. So bringing that ecosystem right to your front door, so to speak, we have that quick ability to do so. And to Ollie's point, it's not, ordering lease lines and waiting for that long lead time. Once you're on Connexus Cloud, it's you have the availability to get to all of our service providers. And just a quick bit on testing and what Ollie's saying is testing new strategies, testing new vendors. We do have a lab environment, a Connexus Labs it's called, and again, we can bring production data right to a sandbox environment where you can have fun, so to speak, with that data.
Having fun with data, that sounds great. Garrett, coming to you, I know Nasdaq's got a lot of experience with looking at cloud solutions. For somebody just coming to this as a start, what advice would you give, given your experience today?
Great, yeah. So know what you're getting into would be my first point of recommendation. Think about what it means to be cloud agnostic. Think about how that technology will integrate to the other parts of your business. Most importantly, document your requirements, understand the decisions and the timeliness in which you'll need to make those decisions. I think we all just said the cloud can be quick, but if the decisions are slow, it won't matter how quick the cloud can be, your deployment will still be slow. So understanding your business and getting in there.
Yeah, you got a lot of people nodding with sort of wise experience there by the look of things, Gary. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So I think know what you're getting into. Yes, you can get and try things out more quickly. And by the sounds of what Mike was saying, it's much easier to get connected to these services now. But really, one thing that we're going to jump onto now is the role of ecosystems and marketplaces to advance the strategy. Monica, again, coming to you, given the wide industry experience and the number of people Celent speak to, there's been ecosystems around solutions previously. What's different with cloud? what's different now to what it was before?
Sure, and we've already started touching on some of this. Mike, obviously, his company has a great ecosystem. They've had that for a long time. But Garrick mentioned how we need to think about how we integrate that across the business. So I think, in a word, the difference is openness. When vendors maybe talked about ecosystems previously, often that was really more about back-end integrations, and that would require involvement of vendors. It'd be partnerships where access to each other's data was really controlled outside of the client. So the decision on what data sets and features client could have access to was sort of out of their hands, and that's really changed with cloud. The cloud paradigm really is about openness, modularity, and standards. So best of breed sounds really good on paper, but in reality, a lot of end users are left to kind of knit together all these complex systems themselves. Whereas with cloud approaches, there's a tendency to start with a standards-led approach and then build in much more open ways. We're seeing things like REST APIs and standards coming for cloud configuration and data models. We've got industry bodies like Finos, which promotes open source, and the EDM Council, which focuses on data management. So that's, to me, it's really just about openness.
There you go. Openness, very important. Ollie, what are clients you're speaking to looking for when they talk about marketplaces, and what is the importance to them of those ecosystems?
Yeah, so I think from our side, like you say, the ecosystem's been around for a long time, right? It's just the speed at which they can grow and the way in which you can contribute to them. And there's obviously we've had we talk about an ecosystem on our DMA platform of brokers for a long time. We're very pleased with our sort of ecosystem of providers such as IPC, on Superfeed today, and what we have there. I think what it does is it just allows that to expand in terms of choice and remove some of the barriers to entry that would come with the traditional sort of implementation and setup, which then leads on to the marketplace piece around really just service discovery. So it's about being, to Monica's point, and I think lots talk about if you're really going to make the most of clouds, whether it be private, public, etc., you can't just lift and shift what you've got. You've got to look at the right way to do things. You mentioned FinOps. We're part of the Open Mama initiative around open standards there, and that's just moved in from under FinOps. So those types of things just really help the ecosystem there really helps in terms of time to market, accessing those services, etc. And then the marketplace is just, as I say, really aid with that service discovery, help people find all of the data sets and services that might be available in that environment. Exchanges with our marketplaces, right? They match a buyer and a seller. There's no, the concept is very simple. It's just the way in which you do it. And there are things you have to be aware of there as well. I think you only have to look at some of the stuff going on with Apple and the App Store at the moment around the fees that they charge, and some of the ways people are now trying to circumvent that to go to market. If things go too far the other way, so competition starts to be very important there as well.
Brilliant. That's really helpful, sort of rounding out some of the comments Monica was making. Mike, if I can come to you next. So given what's just been discussed there, where does IPC fit into this equation, please?
Well, quite right in the middle, quite frankly. We are an enabler, and if a customer wants to use a hybrid model, a public model, what have you, we are that agile provider in that space where we do have what I refer to as the 4 C's. Is we can provide the co-location for you, down to the RU. You want 1 or 2 RU or half a cabinet, what have you, at the closest point to the exchange or in a shared access space. We can provide compute power, whether it's bare metal or virtualized servers. We can spin that up for you as well. And then we can provide the connectivity in and out of that co-location back to your data center, if it's a centralized model that you have, or if it's a distributed model, we can bring it wherever you like. And then at the end is the content, like Superfeed, Nasdaq, market data, as well as the other content and providers that we can get you to are enterprises, and some things that customers might not know us for is providing access to your Office 365 or Salesforce.com, all across a single unified access point, right? So, like I said, we are that enabler for that space, and sitting right in the middle there. And again, it could be for any one of your strategies, so if it's a collections network for your market data, or if you're running a DMA or algo trading in different asset classes, we can help you there, as well as, like I mentioned before, in our lab environment, right? Testing anything that you need, forwards or backwards, what have you, so there's always new iterations coming out for a feed handler or some kind of new, version of code. So there's, that sandbox environment where customers do not have to have that heavy lift on their environment, where they can have that access across IPC.
Thanks very much, Mike. Something that I'd be interested to hear from you, Garrick, around is, what changes do you feel are required to maximize the benefits of these ecosystems, and also streamlining purchasing flow? I'd love to hear from you, and I think, Ollie's probably got a few comments on this as well, but Garrick, could we come to you first? That'd be great.
I'm sure we all have a few comments on this one. So I think broader understanding of and appreciation of the end-to-end process is going to be required. Adoption by partners to evolve their policies to keep pace with the technology. Service and success will differentiate. I think we all appreciate that. And while the technology can always be fantastic and cutting edge, an ability for it to step out and have manual intervention will fuel success. And then obviously, I think, Monica, you even said it, the openness and the connecting of the ecosystem is critical. So, you want to bring parties to connect, but at the same time, you need to be able to service them. So having that openness is going to be critical.
There you go. Thanks, Garrick. Ollie, can you just add a couple of pennies worth to that?
Yeah, I think, just going on from what Garrick said, people are certainly in some of these, marketplaces, etc. Obviously, one of the things you get from there is a middleman, in terms of being able to, almost goes back to that exchange analogy, kind of bringing the buyers and sellers together. And actually what you're doing is almost contracting with a third party who sits in the middle, is collecting fees from both sides, managing the terms with each party, etc. And, for anyone that works in financial services, that's going to sound very, very familiar. I think that really fits with, what clients are looking for, which is, very much flexible commercial terms, trying to, and within a standard framework. And, that means, for someone like us, when we're looking to use those as as well as a way to deliver our services, it's a way to promote and sell our services. It means working closely with, the likes of IPC, etc., to make sure that we've got a framework in place that supports the delivery model. And, there's no point being able to deliver services if you then, very quickly, if you've then got to pull back and, refer back to, getting MSAs in place, etc. So it really just becomes a sales channel there, as much as possible, and embracing that kind of new way of delivering those services and using that channel for good, rather, because I think for some people it would, the idea of not having a contract directly with your end users in some cases, etc., might sound a bit alien to them. If you just embrace that and work with those partners, then it's going to be mutually beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, that that ability to step back a little bit and take the kiddie reins off to be able to embrace the power marketplace system. That leads us nicely on. We've talked about the marketplace of the ecosystem to bring everything together, being able to access more quickly. One of the other points we want to discuss with the ability to explore emerging technologies and experiment with new ideas without the traditional upfront investment we've had in the past. And we touched on a little bit of this already. Mike, how do you guys over at IPC work with your partners and your clients to continually evolve those services that you can offer?
Well, working with our partners, like folks said on the phone here, on the webinar here, we look to create low entry points for, and low barrier entry points, I should say, and utilizing the technology to fuel their growth, right, and get to these emerging technologies. And with the footprint that we do have in place today, we are easily available to bring that data back or bring you into that environment without that full heavy lift, like I was saying before, of a full investment. So using a turnkey solution is really what we try to look at. And like what Ali's saying is embracing that. And Monica mentioned it before, is the openness. So, I'll refer to as, the legacy way of doing things is CCTV, right? Everything's closed and proprietary and closed access, where today it is open, and you have to embrace that openness. And IPC has done the same, is embrace that openness and working with our partners and whether that's with our network side and our market data, or our trading system side. So it's really being able to have that agile partner to bring you into these emerging markets, and working with our partners to make it a very, what I'll say, seamless and easy to work with solution. And again, where you can create ease for customers, that's and obviously you have to have a valid solution and it has to work, but in all intents and purposes, it's really looking at how a customer doesn't have to have that heavy lift and burdensome resources on their side, where a turnkey solution can enable them to fail fast or test their new strategy or what have you, and get into those new emerging markets.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Mike. I think, Garrick, if I could come to you next. Given that ease of access these days and NASDAQ's cloud approach, how has that changed your product development, customer engagement cycle, and how do you look at it enhancements?
So from an enhancements perspective, we look at it as far as whatever the customers are, asking for or talking about most. And that seems pretty obvious, but what is hard to hear is what the customer's challenges with a particular issue are, or content set are. So looking at either new capabilities or improvements to capabilities, additional content in the form of analytics, deeper analytics, historical data, understanding what problem that creates on the client side, our side, all the way through the actual use case that they describe is critical to understand. And again, I go back to understanding whatever you're going to get into and the outcome with the client, and making sure that it's going to meet their needs. And finally, the one thing around that's ever more important than ever, I think, with the cloud is just the customer success and service. If you can't support it, my recommendation would be don't do it. Try to find a partner that is good at it to do it, and make sure that you have the service that is commensurate with the service that you wanted to have and the outcome you want to have with the customers.
That's great. Really helpful. Thank you very much for that insight. Ollie, are you able to share some examples of where failing fast has helped with implementation of market data?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of them already, which is around being able to test a new strategy, being able to test a new market, maybe even being able to test a new vendor. It just removes some of those what would have been heavy lift items that require a level of commitment from the client or the organization, coordination probably across multiple teams within the firm, like we've spoken about before, some level of paperwork, and which depending on the size of the organization, if it's not already in place, can take a substantial period of time in itself. I mean, so when you remove all of those, then actually what you're providing clients is with real choice of what they want to do rather than necessarily what they can do. So on that vendor side, just being able to support POCs more quickly, being able to get people spun up and accessing the data, and the API, maybe it's delayed data or historical data, just to aid the exchange approvals, just really helps with. It helps with that conversation. It helps with that first conversation if someone's interested in something, to say, well, we'll have it turned on tomorrow, rather than, okay, well, if you can give us an LOA, those types of things. And that's where, working with, some of the exchanges, IPC, etc. I think we're seeing real interest and demand.
That's grand. Monica, coming to you next. Capital markets firms have always been innovative and had initiatives around innovation. outside of the costs and the existing, cost savings that cloud can bring, what are some of the new sort of unique challenges capital markets firms are facing when they're looking at cloud and for experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, on the innovation front, starting with that, some of the most exciting aspects of cloud, it's an enabling technology, and it enables other really exciting emerging technologies like, artificial intelligence, advanced data analytics, even quantum computing is available in the cloud. But these are all activities that take huge R&D budgets, and they need to be mutualized on a wide scale to make sense from a business point of view. So that kind of business model really fits better with solution providers than it does with end users, and, on the bank side and asset managers. What capital markets really needs to focus on is not so much how to deliver the underlying technology, but how to make the best use of it for its own business. And just coming back to the innovation in the cloud, there's access to specialized hardware in the cloud. You can get GPUs and FPGAs in the cloud, as I mentioned, quantum computers. So, there's little holding back the innovation in the cloud, but there definitely are challenges remaining. We know the capital markets is highly regulated, and that many of the data sources that are in use are proprietary or contain sort of personal information. So it's not always straightforward putting data that the firm needs in its operations and transactions into the cloud. There's also a lot of concerns around vendor lock-in in the industry. Firms don't want to be restricted from moving between clouds, and that's really an important issue when you consider whether or not to use cloud provided specific tools and services in building applications. There's a lot of interesting things you can use, but then there is that weighing, how much do you want to be cloud agnostic? I think Garrett mentioned being a cloud agnostic versus how much do you want to use that enabling aspect of the cloud and work, as a partner with some of these solutions coming out. For proof of concepts, that's obviously great for the fail fast, trying new things, and for more localized use cases of cloud like back testing. You may not have as many enterprise level concerns. Sometimes these things are put on individual person's credit cards, to do something quick and dirty in the cloud. And that's fantastic because you can really test things out very, very quickly. But once that solution is green lighted, it will need to be scaled up and it will need to be secured for the enterprise. So a lot of additional questions pop up around operational governance, about cybersecurity, and resilience. That's a huge issue right now in the industry, especially from a regulatory focus. Resilience, along with things like systemic and concentration risk as well. Mm-hmm. That's all increased if the industry just piles into certain providers. So it's something that the whole industry has to be aware of. And I know there's discussions going on with regulators all the time about these things. I guess to summarize, everybody needs to have a plan around cloud at this point, but they definitely need to think about, is it an enterprise enabled strategy? And that's where some of these challenges come in at the enterprise level.
Thanks, Monica. Interestingly, we've got questions coming in from the attendees fairly thick and fast now. And there's a number of those topics we just touched on there are coming in as part of the questions. So when we get the Q&A time later in the week, later in the session, we'll probably come back and touch on some of those aspects again. Something we've discussed there is the enterprise and then the particular aspects of capital markets, which can be an issue, and leads us on to thinking around the use of hybrid models on-prem and in the cloud to optimize deployment choices. So, Mike, if I can come to you to start on this topic, is connecting to the cloud sounds easy. Do you just need an interconnect connection, or what do you really need to do here when you're looking at cloud versus hybrid?
Well, it's as simple as having an interconnect connection, yes, and a whole lot more behind that. As Monica said, you do the quick and dirty and easy and test something out with your credit card. And then when you got to scale up for the enterprise level, it's something way beyond that, right? So, and to hit the regulatory bit where, customers cannot just always put everything into the cloud, because there's going to be sensitive data, customer data, that can't leave their premise, so to speak, right? So they will have to look at a hybrid solution in terms of satisfying regulatory regulations, but looking at it from an enterprise level, where you can also, like I mentioned before, getting your Office 365, your Salesforce.com, or any other cloud application provider out there, and being cloud agnostic. Again, something Monica brought up, and as well as Garrick said before, is that our cloud is cloud agnostic, so you can have that ability to reach the different, what I'll say, the general public cloud providers, as we all know. And to Ali's point earlier, is test a new vendor, right? So having that ability to give a customer a lab environment to test how their application or their workflow may react into the cloud. And again, something that Garrick mentioned earlier in the webinars, make sure you have all your processes right. Make sure everything what you need to run your business is set in stone before you embark on a strategy. So having that ability to work with customers, like I said earlier, with our lab environments, but we are that provider that can provide an enterprise level solution for your capital market structure, and making sure you're compliant in your regulatory measures.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Monica, let me come back to you and some of the stuff we touched on already. Should capital markets firms really be looking to putting everything in the cloud, or is there always going to be a continuation of hybrid strategies?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that maybe has different answers depending on where you sit in the industry. But overall, for the short to medium term, Celent believes a hybrid model will be the way forward for the larger enterprises when planning on a cloud strategy. There are, like I said, certain segments of the industry that firms are going all in on cloud. Sort of some hedge funds, some people on the buy side. I was speaking to someone recently, and he said he'd put his coffee maker in the cloud if he could. So he doesn't want anything on premises. And there's plenty of solutions that support that, but. And I would say, actually, on the buy side topic, this idea of outsourcing, it is a big trend for the buy side that we're following quite closely for 2021. Lots of opportunities to move things off premises, and for that segment, there's lots of trading and portfolio systems that are already available via SaaS models, so they're pretty set there. For a large part of the capital markets, there really are a lot of exciting things happening with cloud and cloud solution providers focused on the enterprise. We've been talking about the enterprise for a bit now, but again, it just comes back to there's still factors that favor a hybrid approach. So we can't talk about capital markets without mentioning legacy technology. That's an issue that's still out there. It's still being resolved. COVID-19 has really helped companies realize that sweating your assets is risky for many reasons. But we're just not going to see this wholesale rip and replace anytime soon. There are technologies that help sort of with that migration from legacy, making a bridge from legacy to modern. Things like desktop interop. We've got these innovative data management platforms coming out that also help to be that bridge between legacy and modern applications. These are things that offer companies time to migrate and decommission legacy systems in an orderly and a cost-effective way. There are cases of extremely high performance compute that are going to stay with us. In some cases, firms are very good at utilizing their on-prem infrastructure. And if you have utilization rates, if you have an on-premises cloud or on-premise grid that has utilization of over 70%, for example, then it may not actually pay to move that off-site. It might be just cheaper to keep that on-site. So there's lots of things to think about. Colo, that was mentioned earlier, that's another thing that might make sense to stay sort of on-premises for a while. And the industry overall still has a number of structural issues which are causing headwinds. Even with a good year this year in terms of revenues because of market volatility, it's not been a good year by any stretch of the imagination, but there's been that one sort of silver lining there, is that the volatility did mean higher revenues for some of the banks. They're still going to have to be very selective in how they spend their technology budget. There's still work to do on security and operational fronts and all that. So all these things kind of favor the hybrid approach for the medium term.
Thanks very much, Monica. Ollie, would you consider deploying the cloud a simpler process than on-prem? And when would a trading firm, from your experience, look to use a hybrid model in the way that Monica was touching on there?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief because it sounds like we've got some good questions coming in. But I think, I think a point to note is we're talking about cloud very generally in this conversation, but actually it can mean many different things. From very niche private clouds to obviously the very large public cloud providers and everything in between. And it's not a one size fits all. I think the simple answer is yes, it is simpler if you just want to lift and shift and tick the box. But what it really is different if you actually want to maximize the value of it. And, the example I use is the way that we've deployed Superfeed is, traditionally, big, 32 core hyper-threaded machine or whatever that, we would put multiple markets on, multiple caches for clients to connect to. We've switched all of that to be individual instances per cache. So we can control that at the market level. It can start when the market starts. It can stop when the market stops. We can bring it down for maintenance during the market hours and make it much more specific. And we've rethought our failover model because actually you're not accounting for, you're not running two physical servers in case one dies and you've got to get an engineer out with a new hard disk the next day, because if it dies, you just restart another one. And so it's rethinking those bits. Now, I think the agnostic bit is very key. We've talked for a while about having very much an API-driven strategy, and build and buy and integrating components, etc. Because, most people on this call have probably worked somewhere where, you used to put in these long vertical systems or sometimes horizontal systems, and they'd go in and it's a 3-year project to put in. It's there for 15 years and it's a 3-year project to pull out again. And no one wants to make that same mistake with certainly some of the large cloud providers where, the infrastructure and the application functionality has merged to a degree. And so to Monica's point, if you're not careful, suddenly you've just locked yourself into another vendor. And I think that's why, when we're looking at it, we've always said we're cloud agnostic, and leveraging services such as IPC where you can access all of these from a single environment, I think helps future-proof yourself in terms of that approach.
Yeah, I think that adds some real depth to some of the conversation we've had already. So thanks very much for Ollie. Garrick, coming to you, I think we'll all agree that cloud will continue to enable growth for the industry. But given your experience, what have been some of the biggest surprises for you when implementing cloud strategies, both positive and negative?
Right, so I'll start with the negative. The customer success and the speed at which we can onboard them. And it's easy to turn on the data. It's hard to get the people thinking that they can actually make use of the data right away. So it's simpler, it's easier, there's no hardware, there's no lease lines. I think the point I would raise is it's not turnkey. You still have to code to it. So understanding that there's an element of great new entrants. It still requires some effort. From a positive, the clients are eager to engage, right? So they're eager to give feedback. They're eager to drive wish lists, enhancements requests. I've never seen more clients more willing to just give feedback and iterate on things. And the speed at which they can iterate has been fantastic. We are at NASDAQ, we're constantly engaging with our clients. So we're super excited about the ability and the engagement with clients in this space. And we're obviously using that to drive our demand for the future.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I think we've got to a stage we can actually go to some questions we've got coming in from the audience here, and I'll kick off with this one, and it's for all participants. How does cloud-based delivery impact legacy licensing and entitlements reporting? Doesn't some of the financial content providers still require you to report a physical address or where they're That's participants, but I think maybe Garrick, that's one you want to kick us off with.
Yeah, so I am not the expert in that space, but I believe it's either, we would use either the contracting in the location, I mean, you still have a contract with an address, or the billing address. Somewhere the address is getting populated, and we would require that to be reported to us.
Yeah. Is that anything you've
we
got more experience on, Ollie?
Yeah, we had that. I think it was probably a month, 6 weeks ago. We were struggling to get an approval for someone because we just, and again, this comes down to the providers. The cloud provider wasn't able to give us a physical address, and the client couldn't put it on their Exhibit A or whatever. So, that's where I think we say that, the end-to-end process, there are still areas that, need to be improved. I know entitlements in general, that's something we've been talking to clients about making our existing entitlements service available as a service inside of these environments. So that, again, it's not that lift and shift, it's a chance to do something slightly different, and just make that available like you would anything else as a service. So I think, there's still work to do there, and that's a good example. But, those types of process related things are falling by the wayside sort of on a daily basis, I think, in terms of being able to move that stuff forward.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. The next one's on a sort of similar theme, and if I could direct it to Monica, it's how are exchanges and data source originators adapting their data distribution agreements and compliance requirements for the cloud? Is that something that I think something you might be able to touch on, Monica?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the concept of lift and shift, or just designing from new. If you're building a native cloud data distribution platform, you will automatically start thinking about those kind of issues like entitlements as a service. But if you're operating a legacy data distribution model, that will come with, they never envisioned having data sources delivered in that way, or having, off premises. So there are industry groups addressing this challenge. I think the exchanges, are always coming together and talking about how they can improve their agreements. The vendors are all looking at this. The SS, I think it's the FISD division of the Software Industry Association, SSIA, they work on these issues. They've got a collection of market data managers, and they've been, looking at a lot of these issues for a long time. So I would probably direct people to connect with that organization. And I know they have a number of working groups that look at contractual issues, but it's, that's one of the sort of hidden ways that legacy technology kind of impacts the workflow and efficiency, because you'll have then these legacy mindsets to overcome.
Yeah. Is that anything anybody else would like to touch on that? Garrick, Ollie, Mike, anything you'd like to say?
No, the one thing I would say is we are looking at, and I think I mentioned it earlier, having the ability to have automated processes, but the ability to step out of them when you need to is critical. I mean, the business processes typically are lagging technology. I'll just be honest here, right? We're all amongst friends. Having the ability to step out of the process to then fulfill a requirement, you have to do that. Customers demanding industry groups in the FISD are fantastic. It's going to take time for that to come along. And I think a lot of exchanges, I think we're okay with our agreements and how we approach that from a cloud perspective. But I think a lot of exchanges haven't really addressed it or come to the realization of what it really means. So they're getting there. I rest assured, I think they're getting there, and they're definitely talking about it.
Well, it's good to hear. We're moving in the right direction. Mike, here's one for you. This is from somebody who's asking, who has access to our data in the cloud? What types of security measures can be put in place for protecting customer data in a cloud environment?
Facebook, Google. No, I'm just kidding. Right now. But
given the lawsuit that got filed recently, I think, yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, we are an XNet provider, and our Connexus Cloud is in a secure manner, and we are ISO compliant. So, we do regular security checks. We are audited for, how we enable and entitle our solutions to our customer base, and as Garrett can attest, they always the exchange wants to know who's getting the data, and it's very important in to prove how you entitle that data and prove that it's just that particular customer getting that data. And Ali, I'm sure he can attest to this as well, as having the superfeed and having all that market data coming across as multiple markets, and they all want to know how you actually deploy your solution, and they want to open the hood and look under there and see how it works, right? So it's not just a kick of a tires, so to speak. It's an environment that we have to be above board, so to speak, in a secure environment. Like I said, we are ISO compliant, and in that inherently we do get audited, and kind of repeat myself here, but that's the viewpoint of how we do our workflows and our product development, and the mindset that goes behind that, because the inherent thought is cloud is open in terms of everyone can have access to it. So a little nomenclature there, but it's just how we have to do it is really entitling it just down to the specific level and being able to exhibit that. So again, that's what we have to do on a daily basis, as well as prove it.
That's great. Well, I think it's a very thorough answer, and a bit of wit in there with the Facebook piece as well, which is great. Monica, I think this is one probably for you. We're starting to see the re-emergence of financial clouds. What do you think that might look like for capital markets, please?
Yeah, this is another trend that we've highlighted for 2021. The concept of financial services cloud has been tried before, and it's something that's probably not new to a lot of people. But with the cloud solution providers getting in the scene, it's something that we've noticed they're starting to develop solutions for. And there's nothing for capital markets at the moment, really, but there are financial services cloud aimed at wealth management, for example, and aimed at the compliance space. So it's something to watch from the big cloud solution providers. But on the flip side, as I said, we have had solutions in the market for some time, and IPC is one of them. They offer connectivity and extranet. They connect you with counterparties, and the Connexus Cloud and others, that there are others in the market that do the same sort of thing. They're looking now to enable cloud access. So they're providing with a secure channel into the public cloud, as Mike was talking about. So that's the other take on the financial cloud. There's going to be sort of an interesting dynamic to watch on who gets there first in terms of owning the 2021 version of a financial services cloud. Is it going to be the public cloud solution providers, or is it going to be our industry providers who have been with us for a long time? And obviously for capital markets, there's a lot of additional considerations about compliance. We've touched on those already, security, resiliency. So definitely one to watch for next year.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed for that. Looking at our next question, I think I'm going to give this one to you, Mike, if I can. Do trading firms need to start thinking about rerouting their order flow away from New Jersey with a recently proposed measure to impose taxes on high-frequency transactions processed in the state?
That's a good one, and real relevant. I don't know, Garrick, are you going to move the engines back over to Chicago? Realistically, I guess yes, it would be the answer. And I think a few of the exchanges flexed their muscles and opened up a few of their markets and changed the primary matching engine out of New Jersey and into their alternate location. And so, yes, the answer would be yes. I would suggest folks to think about that. We are one of those industry veterans, as Monica was alluding to, being able to provide a solution for you as being an IPC client. We can inherently get you there in a matter of days. So yes would be the answer. I would suggest it. We do not know if the tax will go through or not, but Exchanges, like I said earlier, have flexed their muscles to quickly show how they're able to be adaptable and adjust to market or not even market environment. It's the environment around them. So it's not even within the market, right? So it's actually real estate. So in that sense, again, the exchanges are showing how quickly they're able to adapt, and customers should follow suit.
That's great. Anything to add to that, Garrick?
No, nothing to add.
Covered that one. This is quite a very broad topic, actually, and one I'll come to you first with, Garrick, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Ollie. And there's two words, and it's what's next.
What's next? So I think the technology will be there to then have, one of the questions is who will be the first exchange to have their matching engine colo in the cloud. I think the technology is still lacking a little for a full cloud deployment. I think that's what's next. I think the technology will get there. The exchanges will pilot their smaller markets, maybe and you will see a transformation in that space. Then all services that hang off that will eventually evolve. You'll have more and more capabilities, more and more technology, more and more customers demanding new and even better things. So I think the cloud is here to stay. It's not a hoax. It has some ways to go to make it the next exchange in the cloud, but it's getting there.
There you go. Thanks, Garrick. Ollie, predictions. What do you think about what's next?
I don't know. This 2020 is not the year for predictions, but I think I would say, I think I agree with Garrick in terms of, obviously, some interesting news around, Aquis and SGX and some of the POCs that are done there for exchanges. But I think that really is longer term. I think the continued focus is going to be around, the momentum that's been built up this year and the acceleration that's come from, the pandemic to continue to move and take advantage of cloud environments where they suit the business. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, and it's not right for everyone. But where it does make sense, I think we'll continue to see that focus. And I think what you'll start to see, I think the entitlements and the the licensing will continue to grow in terms of the focus there, because I think, and as Monica said, I know there's FISD have recently set up a new cloud working group, etc., for some of these pieces. But I think that's the next big challenge. First of all, it was getting the data into the cloud. Now it's controlling the data in the cloud, and as we said, that's why we're making our entitlement solution available for that reason, in line with client demand. I do think you'll continue to see this talk around, the agnostic piece and this cloud agnostic set of tools and services that sit above those core cloud providers, and some of what Mike was talking about, to make that more agnostic and to make it a fairer and a more mobile and modular choice. But yeah, I think that's, and then I think the other area that will come as part, we talk about, exchanges and stuff, is some of those changes in commercial models. As people, are paying for compute power on demand, and they're paying for all these other things on demand, they're going to want to start paying for the data on demand as well. So that's probably going to, probably not so much immediately in 2021, but beyond. And then that fits with one area on our side, which is around more of a standard set of service definitions around all of these services that are available, and perhaps more of a centralized kind of nomenclature and taxonomy around market data services and provisions and contractual terms, etc.
Thanks, Ollie. That leads us on to probably one last question, and something you touched on there I think is quite relevant. If I could put this one to Monica, and it's saying this quarter there's been headcount reductions in capital markets and in banking and generally. Some are obviously due to COVID, etc. But how much do you think cloud transformation and actually foreseen efficiencies are driving that?
Is the question that how much is cloud driving headcount?
Cloud, actually the foreseen rather than unforeseen efficiencies of new technology and cloud environments driving this versus just the market in general.
Well, because this nature of the cloud, this enabling technology nature, obviously things like automation, intelligent automation is a big trend. So that's an area where the efficiency often comes through headcount reduction. But I think a lot of firms are, in this move to really focus on core business values. There is an effort by firms to try to retrain and redeploy people into areas that are useful to the business. The truth is there's still a huge skills shortage and gap when it comes to new technologies, and the cost of acquiring new skills and competing in the market, especially when you've got Facebook and Google and all those guys looking very, very exciting for staff. It just makes sense, I think, for a lot of companies. They realize that it's a better approach to kind of retrain and remodel their workforce into one that's really focused on helping the business. There are things like low-code, no-code tools coming out, so you don't have to be a hardcore programmer. So I think if you're a hardcore infrastructure, hardcore programmer, then maybe but there's lots of opportunities for you elsewhere.
I'm sure. I'm not trying to put forward doom and gloom. I suppose it's a transition to as a service type technologies, which moves from the core business focus of the headcount, and some of that headcount which used to support the business and moves off to the as a service industry, supporting the banks themselves.
Yeah,
So
there's
evolution rather than revolution.
Yeah, there's a resiliency issue too. If you can do things automated, it takes out, obviously with COVID, people were out of the equation for various reasons. Computers kept going.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. That's an hour done. We had quite a few more questions, which unfortunately I wasn't able to get to. But I think it's been a really interesting discussion. There's some really key points to come out. I think people watching for the first time weren't as involved in the revolution or evolution to the cloud, have probably learned quite a bit. So if I could say thank you to Monica, Garrick, Mike, and Ollie. Anybody attending, we will be putting together a write-up, just a summary of what we've discussed this afternoon. And my understanding is we'll also be making this video available for people to look at down the road if they haven't had a chance or want to delve back into some of the conversation we've had. So, guys, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation this afternoon, and have a great rest of your day.